SABC News presentation.
Good evening, welcome to Interface. My name is Gebeda-Marele. So those telemarketers that always call you with products that you have absolutely no interest in, have you ever wondered how they got your numbers to begin with? Well, there are new acts that are in place aimed at dealing with such violations of personal information. The Protection of Personal Information Act, or POPI as it's commonly known, and the Promotion of Access to Information Act, or POPIA, were signed into law back in 2013, but there have been some delays in their implementation in the establishment of the information regulator that will oversee them. Why? We'll try and find out those answers and more from our guest this evening, Dr. Matole Motshekga, who is the chairperson of the Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Justice and Correctional Services. He joins us now. And remember, if you would like to take part in the discussion, you can always do so via our social media pages. On Facebook, you can find us at Interface on SABC, and on Twitter at Gebeda-Marele or at Interface on SABC. Welcome to the program, sir. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good afternoon, Tembi and the listeners.
So I mentioned in the intro, we've got POPI, we've got POPIA, and we're talking about an information regulator. Can you just talk us through why there's a need for these acts and the regulator?
Let me start off by saying that the Information Regulator POPIA Act was signed into law on the 26th of November last year. But on the 11th of April 2014, then it was partially brought into action. But the provisions which were promulgated related to the establishment of the Office of the Information Regulator. But
so let me just clarify. Are you saying that the President didn't sign them back in 2013? It was actually last year that they were signed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, what happens is that, there are people who collect information, they keep it. Now the question is, how protected is that information? Because the information collected relates to individuals who have under the Constitution the right to privacy. Now, once somebody has collected information about you, is keeping it, the question arises, to which extent are your rights to privacy protected? And sometimes this information gets processed for business purposes, but it gets done in a way that is intrusive to your privacy.
Right.
Now, that's why government, Parliament saw the need to introduce legislation which will ensure that personal information is protected, but at the same time strike a balance between the rights of individual to privacy and also the need of personal information for legitimate business purposes.
So, just for interest's sake, so we're heading towards the elections now, and every now and again you get some or other political party leaving voice messages on our phones or sending us SMSs saying, vote for me here, vote for me there. And the question arises, how did they get our information to begin with?
They get the information because as matters stands now, businesses, political parties, individuals have the right to collect information, keep it, and process it, but there's no protection against the people whose information is being collected, processed, and kept. So that is one reason why there's a need for this legislation, that we shouldn't prevent people from collecting the information, but it must be done under the law and for legitimate purposes.
Let's get to the how then. How would the POPI Act, for an example, help to stop that? how would it protect our personal information?
The POPIA Act will do so because there are 8 principles which must be complied with. And now, the other thing is that where those principles are violated, there will be remedies available to the victims of such intrusion.
What kind of remedies?
For instance, one can face a fine of up to 10 million and imprisonment or both. So it is believed that that would serve as a deterrent against people who handle other people's information.
So if you talk to the people in the direct marketing space, they'll tell you, how else are we going to access the information or our customers? Or how else are we going to help business to access their customers? Where is the middle ground then in terms of not putting businesses out of business, as it were, and also protecting our information?
There is no prohibition against collecting, keeping of information. But that has got to be done in terms of the law. And the law has laid down these 8 principles, and therefore the businesses must comply with those principles, because we cannot have a situation where, for profit purposes, the rights of individuals that are protected by the Constitution are violated. So this act is actually in the interests of both the individuals and business, because you don't want to wait until a business has violated the right of someone to privacy, and these people have got to go to court for a remedy, and the majority of people cannot afford those legal processes. So this will ensure that ordinary people are protected, because the majority of the people are these so-called ordinary people who would not otherwise have access to courts to get remedial actions.
We don't have time to go through all 8 of those principles, but could you just touch on some of the key ones so we have an idea of what will change?
You see, for instance, you have children, you have religious bodies, you have people who have hold certain philosophical ideas, people who stem from certain ethnic origins, and all these things can be used against people. And also you have a situation, a cross-border situation, where information from South Africa can be used elsewhere, where South African courts don't have jurisdiction. Now where there is international law, international standards, so which means that what a company can say that I operate offshore, and therefore have the right to use that information offshore, because South African courts have no jurisdiction over there, like these cyber crimes and things like that. So that is regulated in details in the legislature, so that there will be certainty as to what can and what cannot be done.
At Interface on SABC or at Gebeda-Marele is how you find us on Twitter and also on Facebook. Give us your thoughts about what you think of the steps that the government is planning to take, and whether you think it's going to work in protecting our personal information. We are back right after this break. And we are in conversation with Dr. Mathole Motshekga, who is talking to us in his capacity as the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee in Parliament on Justice and Correctional Services, talking to us about the protection of personal information and also about the establishment of an information regulator. And we are taking your thoughts, as always, on our social media pages. So, Dr. Motshekga, the establishment of the regulator, there seems to have been some delays with that. What is the issue there?
You see, before laws come into force, the president has got to sign them into law. But also, you know, we are a constitutional state. It's important that after Parliament has passed these laws, the president himself must satisfy himself that these laws are not in conflict with others and that they are consistent with the constitution of the country. And that's why, for instance, in this particular case, although the act is signed into law, it is gradually or progressively being put into action. For instance, the first step was to create the office of the public regulator, and then there are transitional clauses which will come into operation within a year or three, because that public regulator must be afforded space to internalize that law, to set up the necessary mechanisms to make the whole office operational. So I think it's really an attempt to err on the side of, certainty and regularity.
So there are reports that the committee put forward Advocate Pensi Tlakula to head up the regulator, and that, you got some opposition from those that said because of the public protector's findings against her when she left the IEC, she actually isn't fit to hold that office.
You see, I think we must distinguish between politicking and reality, because you can expect opposition parties not to come up with one thing or another against the position. Otherwise, they will be out of business. Because I chaired the meeting that recommended Advocate Pensi Tlakula, I actually allowed the opposition more time to raise anything that they have against her so that she can have an opportunity to answer. And there was nothing substantive that disqualifies her to hold the position. And also the processes which were initiated against her came to naught because there was nothing really substantive against her, and that's why she was even appointed to head the human rights, the Pan-African Human Rights Commission. It's called Human and People's Rights Commission. So she's a well-respected legal person, both in the country and on the continent.
So one of the things that, has been coming up time and time again whenever we read about this information regulator is that, various commentators are saying this would be a person that would need to be very brave in the kinds of decisions that they would need to take as the regulator. What are some of the things that you anticipate the regulator will come up against that will require that kind of bravery?
It's actually not a question of bravery. We live under the constitution and the law. We need somebody who will apply the constitution of the law without fear or favor. So it's not really about bravery, because you can be brave and go and violate every procedure or every law. We want a person who understands the constitution and the law and who will apply them without fear or favor. And Advocate Pensi Tlakula is such a person.
And according to reports, she was 3 votes short in the last voting session that you had of getting that seat. What happens now?
You see, I'm sure you are aware that in Parliament there are some parties who want to play politics by absenting themselves or walking out, and sometimes then you find that there's no quorum required for a specific decision. But that is not a reflection on her personality, integrity, and qualification for the position. So we are happy that we have a person of that caliber.
But I mean, in terms of process, she needed 201 votes, she got 198. What happens? Do you set another date and have another revote and hope that everybody shows up at that one?
The political parties, especially the majority party, has a responsibility to make sure that its members attend, because the majority party has 264 seats. So if they attend, we won't have that situation. But you see, it's in the interest of the country that our processes in Parliament are inclusive, and the ruling party doesn't believe in using numbers against anyone. And that's why we would encourage all political parties to attend and exercise their right to vote. But as far as the process that identified her is concerned, I think we are all satisfied that there was no better candidate than her, and that there is nothing that would disqualify her from holding that position.
And when are you holding that vote again?
We're only going back to Parliament in August, and now we're busy with the elections. And then we will ensure that we have the right numbers to pass.
In April, there was a report that came out from the United Nations Human Rights Committee, and they raised concerns about what they called unlawful surveillance practices in South Africa, and they said there was a lack of transparency of government surveillance policy. How do you respond to that kind of criticism?
You see, we live in a world full of conflicting interest. And South Africa must first and foremost put the interests of its citizens first. But you have global forces who have other interests. And I don't think that it would be correct to put the interests of foreign forces above the interests of the country. But what South Africa doesn't do is to do things contrary to international law. So no one is saying that South Africa violated international law. They are just expressing opinions on surveillance, and they are entitled to express opinions.
Very keen to hear what you actually mean by that and how that relates to this particular report. But we have to take another short break. We are back right after this, and do stay with us. Welcome back. Our guest on Interface tonight is the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Justice and Correctional Services, Dr. Matole Motshekga, and we're talking about the information regulator and how it's going to affect you and I in terms of the protection of our personal information. And we've talked about a number of things, and before the break we were talking about the report that came out from the UN, and one of the concerns that they raised is that maybe, you know, the POPIA Act, for an example, will make it easier for the government to continue to do what they see as unlawful surveillance that the government has been engaging in.
You know, the absence of the type of law that we're talking about, the POPIA Act, the threats to the rights of privacy that is protected by our Constitution. There are more threats to our citizens than what they're talking about. And we have never been engaged, even when we discussed this matter in Parliament and we had public hearings, there was no submission from whatever quarter suggesting those things. And now, after all has been said and done, then you have opinions of international players, and we respect their opinions. But we, as South Africans and as South African Parliament, we have satisfied ourselves that we have not done anything that is in conflict with the international law. In fact, our law is aimed at bringing our situation in line with international law. So we are a country that respects international law, and when we make our laws, we ensure that there's no conflict. So I really pity those people, but I respect their opinions.
But can you categorically say that our government has not been surveilling the citizens unlawfully?
I can tell you that all governments in the country, in the world, are responsible for the security of their nations. And now, if all governments in the world were actually to go and publicize what they do to secure their citizens, there would be no point in securing the citizens. You can see the world is a very dangerous place to live in today. So I think that under international law, under national laws of all countries, there is an extent to which governments are entitled to adopt certain security measures to secure their citizens.
You're right to highlight that this is not unique to South Africa. I mean, the United States is grappling with that, with the Snowden case, and the UK and everybody else, they're also grappling with this issue. But as a citizen, when you hear that you know, governments have to do what they have to do, you wonder to what extent. So when the POPIA Act comes into play, how will you ensure, or how will the regulator ensure that the government is able to still secure us in the way that you say, but does not you know, cross the line in terms of being unlawful in the way they do it?
That's why we need a person like Pensi Tlakula, a person with integrity, to be the watchdog, to ensure that even government itself does not cross the line. And that's why we want a person that is independent, who can act without fear or favor. So we don't want somebody who is going to be a puppet of any state organ, because it's also in the interest of government itself that the rights of its citizens are protected. So I think that we should fear government less and be suspicious of those that say we don't need this legislation.
The RICA Act of 2002, this very report says that it had weak safeguards in terms of ensuring the very thing that you're talking about, and that it's also weak in the oversight. So what safeguards are there in the POPIA Act that will give us comfort as citizens that we will not get this kind of issue of interference being an issue for us as citizens?
One major principle is the right of the citizens whose information is analyzed or kept to know. Just that right to know empowers the citizens to seek remedies in case there is a violation or a potential threat to the rights of privacy. So this is a very balanced act that South Africans must be happy that they have a government that is proactive, that wants to ensure that they are protected because, there are medical schemes, there are banks, there are credit providers, and there have been many scams also of people who collect money from people, and you find people being married to people they don't know.
I was one of those.
Yeah, you see. So we really want to protect our people.
Very quickly, speaking of the Right to Know, the Right to Know campaign has also made some requests or demands, and they're asking that there be an Inspector General of Intelligence and a privacy watchdog who is within or housed within the information regulator. Are you amenable to that?
You see, we are a democratic state. We take mandates from the people in the light of the urgent needs of the people. But if there are more than 1,000 NGOs in the country are going to dictate which laws must be made, by when, which offices must be created, there will be no time to run the country. We will be debating proposals by NGOs, because every government, every 5 years, it goes to the voters, present a manifesto, and say these are the things that we can do in the following years. So governments must implement manifestos that the people have endorsed. Now, if there are going to be other manifestos that come through the back door, there will be no right time to govern. And governments is about delivering services to the people.
All right. We'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Dr. Motshekga, for coming through to talk to us about this. And I'm sure we will continue to monitor it as we get closer to the execution date. And we will take your thoughts, as per usual, on our social media pages. So let's continue the conversation there. For now, it's goodbye.